number 105. Number 105. What happened to hymn 19? It was not the tune that would be familiar.
Oh.
So we abandoned hymn 19. And that tune, that means tune in this hymnal is just different enough from what we normally sing that throws you off, doesn't it, Susan?
Ah, yeah.
Just different enough.
Threw us off.
All right. We are back in Genesis. And chapter 23. We're toward the end of chapter 23. I forgot my Bible upstairs. Andrew, could I ask you to get the Bible off the pulpit for me? Thank you. I don't even have my phone with me. I can look it up on my phone. I'm short on that. So what's going to happen is Abraham is going to seek a son, seek a wife for his son Isaac. That's what we're going to be starting out with tonight. It's one of the Old Testament wedding stories and how that was all arranged. And I say arranged because it's an arranged marriage. Okay, it's not like we do here in the West in modern times. But Abraham, as the father of the family, has a responsibility to seek out a bride for his son Isaac. And so this is the mission that he's sending his servant Eliezer. Likely Eliezer. I think in this part of the text it doesn't give the name, but he was the servant a little bit earlier in the story. Thank you, Andrew. So Genesis, turn to chapter 23. Chapter 23. And actually I've introduced us to 24, so let's start looking at chapter 24. Would someone read for us verses 12 through 21? 12 through 21. Well, read verses 12 to 14 to get us started. 12 to 14 of chapter 24.
Then he prayed, Lord God of my master Abraham, make me successful today and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to the young woman, please let down your jar that I may have a drink, and she says, drink, and I'll water your camels too. Let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. But this I will know that you have shown kindness. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master.
Okay, thank you. So here we are getting started. I gave you a little bit of the background of the story. Abraham has his chief servant swear that he is going to do this task of finding Isaac a wife. He sends him out to where Abraham and his family had originally come from, up in the region of Haran, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And now the servant is there. He's waiting by the well. How does he start on his mission? What does he do when he gets to the town?
He prayed.
He prays. He prays. He begins by asking for God's help. Now, does he just say, Lord, bless my task today, or how does the prayer shape up?
It's very specific.
It's very specific. How so, Susan?
Well, he's saying that the woman I asked for a drink, have her not only give me a drink, but have her water my camels.
Okay, have her water my camels. And so she'll give the servant a drink, but she'll also give the camels a drink. I wonder how many ladies in the room have watered camels before? No hands going up? Not a one. What do you think? How much might a camel drink?
Quite a bit.
About 20 gallons? You must have been reading about camels this week. It's a lot of water. It's a lot of water. What does that tell us about the young lady if she's willing to do this?
Patience.
Patience?
Party.
Hardy? Hardworking? Nobody said not very smart. Yeah, there's some character traits that are going to come to the fore if this young lady is willing to do what was in that prayer. Okay, she's going to show hospitality to a stranger, but then she's going to go the extra mile, we might say, of this task, which seems to be a very large task. Pretty interesting thing. I'll ask the question, you don't have to raise a hand about this one. Did you pray about meeting your spouse? Those of you who are married. Did you pray about it? Susan is an answer to my prayers. I got to a point in my life where I wanted to be married, and I began praying, and that's when I met her. And I believe that God answered those prayers and brought her into my life. She's a fulfillment of those prayers. Encourage one another. Encourage the younger people that you know who are in this situation to pray. To pray for God's blessing in this matter. Okay? I think the servant gives us an example here. I don't know about the camel part, about the watering the camels. Maybe don't pray, Lord, send me a spouse who will water my camels. But there's a little bit of bargaining going on with God there. But do pray about that. Make this a holy endeavor, seeking the will of God.
When you get married, the pastor prays for you. Pastor prays for you if you get married in church.
Yes, but the pastor doesn't pick out your spouse.
No, I understand that, but
Yeah.
what I mean is you've already picked out your spouse. They usually counsel you.
Oh, yes.
And after you go through a lot of that, you go through the ceremony, and it's always with God's blessing.
Yes.
It
Yes.
doesn't always end up that way, but
And that's what we're after, isn't it? When we do a church wedding or one that is being led by a Christian pastor, what we're seeking is God's blessing. We're looking for God's blessing. The state can marry you. You can go to the justice of the peace and have a perfectly legal and recognizable wedding.
you don't pray over your person. He just goes through the ceremony. He doesn't go through
They typically aren't doing some sort of premarital counseling, and they're not pronouncing the blessing of God over you in the name of the Holy Trinity,
Right.
which are all things that will happen in a Christian wedding.
Right.
It's a gathering in God's presence with the purpose of seeking His blessing. I was telling a couple just this week, it's a worship service.
Yeah.
If I do your wedding, it's going to be a worship service.
Yeah.
That's what this is about. It's invoking God.
Right.
And I don't just show up and sign papers
Right.
and do a cute ceremony. Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I hear at weddings, a lot of people make their future spouses.
A lot of people make their futures.
Meet their futures.
Oh, and weddings. And weddings. That can happen. My mom and dad met at a wedding, a relative's wedding. So that can happen. Yeah. Okay. So, we get a little bit of the lay of the land here. Someone read for us now verses 15 to 21. 15 to 21. Let's see what happens next.
Before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her water jar on her shoulder. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, "Please give me a little water to drink from your jar." She said, "Drink, my lord." And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, "I will draw water for your camels also, until they have finished drinking." So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water, and she drew for all his camels. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not.
Interesting. So she immediately comes out She fits the bill in terms of what Isaac might be interested in, apparently. And she very quickly volunteers to give the servant a drink of water. And then who volunteers her for the camels? She volunteers herself, doesn't she? She agrees to do this. Yeah, it makes you wonder if maybe the servant was going like this. Camels, camels. It doesn't say that though. She does this from her own heart. Says a lot about her as a person, doesn't it? What kind of person she is. Yeah, these are character traits that you would hope to find in a spouse. This kind of hospitality and generous and respectful. She's respectful too, isn't she? Drink, my Lord, she says. She's all of these things. They then go into negotiations. The servant goes home with her and meets the family, and it's a relative of Abraham's family. So as is typical with Israelite marriages, they marry within their clan or close, within their clan or their tribe. And so that situation's all working out. They sit down and have a meal together and talk the whole thing over. And the servant explains why he's there. That he's looking for a bride for his master's son. And then he brings out a bunch of gifts and starts passing those around for the family to see. This was typical of the time, okay? And it's a way of demonstrating, if she goes with me to marry this young man, she won't starve, okay? It's a way of demonstrating to the family that their loved one's going to be taken care of. That shows their wealth. It shows what they have. And that's a factor in marriage, isn't it? It's a factor in marriage. What is it? Money can't buy you love. It's a Beatles song, right? Years ago. Money can't buy you love, but it might be hard to live just on love too, right? That might get to be trouble. And so these economic factors enter in to discussions of relationships, as I think is proper. It's proper that they should, because you want that future to be good and bright in that way. Arranged marriage. How many of you had an arranged marriage? Your parents picked out your spouse for you? Nobody?
My mother wanted to.
How'd you feel about her choice, Diane?
Not very well.
Not very well. Yeah, it does happen here in the States. Which cultural group is famous for this kind of marriage?
India.
The Indians. Okay, from Asia, India. Okay, they're famous for arranging their marriages, and they go to a lot of effort to pick out the right person for their family member. Go ahead, Andrew.
My parents didn't have an arranged marriage, but it took other people to put them together.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, sometimes folks will do that. They play a little matchmaker type of a game. And
his aunt, my mother worked with his aunt. And she put them together.
and brought them together. Okay. Yeah? How many of you can say that family was involved? Oh, most of you aren't raising your hands. Susan's family was involved. I was a vicar at the time, a student pastor, serving in southern Indiana. And once a month, I would go up to Bologna, where my supervisor was at, and I would preach there while he was administering the sacraments in the little church that I was serving down in the next county. And I didn't know it at the time, but members of Susan's family were teasing her about me.
And that's enough.
That's enough. That's all we need to say.
Go on. Please.
Go on. So they were teasing, I was praying. And it all worked out. As for 30 years, God be praised. So yeah, there are these family factors are here in marriages in the States, but not like this. This is pretty intense family involvement. Let's go to chapter 24 now, verses 62 to 67. I'll write that on the board if I find a pen. So toward the end of the chapter, verses 62 to 67, let's see how this is working out. Beer Lahai Roy is that big word in there that you're all afraid of. Beer Lahai Roy. You can just say beer if you like. I know you can say beer.
Sound like a bar.
Do we have a reader?
Now Isaac had returned from Beer Lahai Roi and was dwelling in the Negev. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening. And he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, there were camels coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel and ran to the servant. Who is that man walking in the field to meet us? The servant said, It is my master. So she took her veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death.
So here the couple is meeting for the first time. How is Rebekah responding at the sight of her husband coming?
Seems pretty happy about it.
Seems happy? Okay, definitely.
She inquired about him.
She inquires about him. She's a little bit curious.
Modestly, I guess.
Modestly. How so, Susan?
Well, she puts the veil over her to cover herself. That must meant something in the culture.
Okay, she veils herself. She veils herself. Probably fear of COVID. Right? No. Yeah, this is an act of modesty. She's acting modestly and putting this veil on. Put yourself, ladies, in Rebekah's sandals for a minute. How might you have responded under such circumstances?
I wouldn't have watered the camels.
Okay, thank you for telling us that. Sorry. Yeah, she was ready to do some pretty hard work. Maybe if you'd grown up in the culture.
Maybe.
Maybe. Yeah. Put on her sandals for a minute. You're meeting your intended husband for the first time. What does this feel like?
Maybe scared.
Scared. Scared. Yeah.
She didn't have a choice.
Well, there's a part of the story we didn't read. The servant asks if she will go with him to meet Isaac, and she agrees to that. And then the family sends her with its blessing. They speak a blessing over her about prospering and send her on her way. So she is asked, and she does go by an act of faith, essentially an act of faith. But why scared? Why scared?
The unknown.
The unknown. Yeah.
What would have happened if she had said no in her culture?
If she had said no back at Nahor, her father's house,
Yeah.
then the deal would have been off, I think. By the looks of it, they're not trying to force her into the relationship. They ask her if she's ready and willing to do this. So they're making the arrangements, but her will is involved. It isn't just, you got to do this and that's it. Okay? So they are respecting her will, her choice in the matter.
Was the master, the father of the son, was the master, she's all in the field. She saw a man. And
Yes.
asked him who it was, he says, my master.
Yes.
He related to.
So it's so Isaac is Abraham's Abraham's son, and so his relationship to the servant that Abraham sends is that he's regarded as the master.
Oh,
Okay, so there it's that servant
So he had
master
nothing-
relationship.
He had nothing to do about coming to the home. In other words, he wouldn't have met him at the home, saw him in the field. But that's
Yeah,
what-
they see each other for the first time in the field.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's veiling herself. Modesty probably is a part of it in the culture, but I think Joe's answer also makes sense. This might have been a little bit intimidating, right? A little bit intimidating, having that meeting for the first time and veiling yourself maybe made her feel more comfortable in the circumstances.
I
Right.
think her family must have been religious too, what you read here, but they'd possibly prayed about it too.
Yes, they speak a blessing over her. They're asking God to bless her. So that shows devotion,
Yeah.
I would say, on their parts.
So then they've been praying that somebody would show up.
They may have been praying that, Lord, come take this girl away. Well, not quite that way. But hey, this is a good thought Henry has here. Parents and grandparents, do you pray about the spouses for your children and grandchildren? That the Lord would send the right person into their life. Yeah, that's a great thought, Henry. A great thought. Something that we should do. I know Susan and I have been praying this for a very long time for our children. Verses 25, or chapter 25, verses 1 through 11. Let's have a look at that. Chapter 25, verses 1 through 11. I'm going to read this because it's harder reading. Okay. And Sarah has passed away. Rebekah inherits her tent by the sounds of it. She gets her own tent, and it had been Sarah's. But now Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Wow. Jokshan fathered Sheba and Dedan. Sons of Dedan were Asherim, Letushim, and Loimim. We could go on this way. Drop down to verse 6. But to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts, and while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. So Abraham is a typical kind of sheikh in this area. He's got wives. He's also got concubines. Okay. What's a concubine? Concubine is sort of a, to put it closer to our culture, it's like a second level wife. So you take a concubine and you can have family with her, but she is not legally your official, the children are not legally your official heir. Okay? It's a different sort of relationship than we allow here in the United States, because in the United States our marriage practices are influenced by...
Oh, this is before Exodus.
Before the law, before the giving of the law, but even after the law, the kings in Israel will have multiple wives and concubines. Okay? It's a way of showing off wealth. Okay? It's also a way of building relationships. So there's a tribal leader that you're supposed to be head of. And he wants to please you, you want to please him, and so you marry one of his daughters. And add to the family that way. Now we're kin, so that means we're going to take care of each other. This is the thinking in this part of the world.
Isn't that against God's law?
Later.
I mean, he was a man of God. So would that come into play with?
Yeah. In the Old Testament, there are not specific laws against having multiple spouses.
I just can't imagine.
Is this?
You can't imagine? Yes, I agree. Go ahead.
Is this our same Abraham that's married to Sarah?
Yes.
And he's
Yeah. But Sarah has passed on.
Oh.
She has died.
That's right, she did.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then he takes a second wife named Keturah,
And then he has all these children.
and lots of kids as a consequence of that. What were you saying, Jim?
I said he was going, it seemed like he was, said lived to be 175,
Yes.
and so he's still quite a man.
Well, we'll leave it at that. We'll leave it at that. He's quite a guy. To have this many spouses, though, was unusual. Okay, even in this culture. Why would it be unusual?
What'd you say?
Why would it be unusual to have so many spouses in a culture where this is legally allowed?
Well, how many do you have? 6.
Well,
six wives?
No, 6 children.
Children, okay.
Yeah, so he has Sarah, he has Hagar in a concubine relationship earlier on,
Yeah.
and now Keturah.
Okay.
So that makes 3 that I'm aware of. It mentions other concubines, though. It mentions, so there's more. How many? I don't think it counts. But why would it be unusual in a culture to have, for someone to have more than one wife?
I couldn't afford them.
Couldn't afford them?
Too many camels somewhere.
You start running out of women, don't you? If every man is marrying this many wives, you're going to run out of women. And what's that going to lead to? Fighting. It's going to lead to fighting. So to do this, like Abraham, you have to be very well off. The average person in ancient culture got married once, okay? Or had one spouse at a time. You know, if someone died, you might marry again. Because it just wouldn't have been possible to do all of that. This is also true, for example, in Muslim culture, right, which allows multiple marriages. Muhammad says the ideal number of wives is 4. 4 is the ideal number of wives. He hasn't read Genesis, apparently, because we're going to see here later on that Jacob has 4 wives, and it's no end of trouble. Okay? It's no end of trouble. I'm not sure Muhammad read that part of Genesis. You probably did, but he says that as a big community leader, right? He can afford that. But the average Muslim does not have multiple wives. Doesn't happen. You can't afford it. You can't carry on relationships that way. You know, the ladies might have a say in what the husband ultimately does in these such situations. It's funny though, it depends on, a lot of it's culturally driven. I remember I had a class on ethnology, which is about cultures and ethnic groups and how they behave and stuff like that. And it was, we read in our textbook about a story from Africa, and there were a husband and a wife having a discussion, and the wife is telling her husband that she wants him to marry a second wife. And he's like, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And she's like, I need the help. I need the help around here. Go get a second wife. See, in that culture, it's a very different thinking, isn't it? It's a very different thinking. So culture is a big factor in all of this. Now, in Christian marriages, do we have multiple wives? Or husbands, for that matter? No. Why not?
The 6th commandment.
The 6th commandment? But they had the 6th commandment back in the Old Testament, and they still were marrying multiple wives. Brian?
I was going to say for mental health.
Keep it simple, right? Keep it simple. Yeah, why not?
2 become as one.
The 2 become as one. Right? When Jesus teaches about marriage in the New Testament, he says, when God made them man and woman in the beginning, the 2 become one flesh. And that this was God's intention for the marriage relationship. The multiple, husbands or wives situation, that's a human complication that enters in. But God's ideal, what he intended, was one man, one woman. That's what he intended. Later on in the New Testament, St. Paul is teaching Timothy about these matters, and he's describing the office of a pastor. And he says he must be the husband of one wife. One wife. And so these are the ideals that are taught in the New Testament and have shaped Christian views of marriage. Okay? That you have one spouse rather than multiple. Okay? So that's why we do what we do in the United States. Any questions or comments about all of this? All right. So in the beginning of chapter 25, it's telling us that Abraham passes away. Verse 11, after the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac his son, and Isaac settled in Beer Lahai Roi. They're in the promised land. And then it gives the generations of Ishmael. Ishmael is his son with Hagar, the Egyptian. and describes all of them. And what we see here is the fulfillment of God's promise. You remember when God gives Abraham the covenant, he says that he's going to be the father of many nations. The father of many nations. And as you read there in chapter 25, you see this fulfilled in the life of Abraham and in his family, who all descends from Abraham. So that's the thing here. But the promise is going to be delivered and confirmed through Isaac. He's the son of the inheritance, the son of the promise. Okay? That's the relationship there. I've got a whole other lesson prepared that I would be starting on here, but I'm not going to launch into all of that. What comments or questions do you have so far through our study here in Genesis, or anything else that might be on your mind? While you're thinking, someone left me this reminder that there are some CDs on the back table that have been donated by a member of the congregation, and anyone who would like to take one, they can go ahead and take one. Okay? So those are on the back table there. Questions or comments thus far in the book of Genesis? We've got through the first patriarch here, patriarchs, Abraham and his wife Sarah. I realize it explained everything so well.
We didn't have more than one wife when he was married to Sarah, did he? Sarah was the only wife he had.
Well, you remember the relationship that he had with Hagar.
Okay.
Sarah was trying to bear children and was not able to, and so she gives her handmaiden Hagar in that relationship, and that would have been like a concubine type relationship.
Yeah.
That was my next question was, she wasn't married to him, but the third wife had all these other children. They were married.
Yes, I think it uses the word wife there for Keturah. She's an official wife. Yeah. Say again?
That was after Sarah died.
That was after Sarah passes on, from the way it's written here, yes. That's my understanding. Yeah.
Was this a time when if a woman became widowed, then the brother took on the job of taking her in? When they took her in, what was her status in the family then?
Okay, so you're talking about what's called Levirate marriage.
Right.
Levirate marriage, and this is described later in the law of Moses.
Okay. So this wasn't have anything to do with this era?
Well, culturally it's going on. We'll see at a later time in Genesis that there are members of, I think it's Judah's family, who are supposed to raise up children by a widow whose husband died, and they don't fulfill that, and they fall under God's judgment for not taking care of her. And that's the idea behind the law, that you're showing honor to your brother by making sure his wife is taken care of and making sure that there is a child to inherit the property and carry on the family line. So that's the idea behind that Levirate marriage. We'll come to that a little bit later in the book. But it all falls under regulations in the books of Moses. He writes about it. It's a law for ancient Israel. Yeah, good question about the details of the law.
Mm-hmm. All these other children that Abraham had, did any of them, is there anything else about them in the Bible, or is that the only time they're mentioned?
Yeah, we're given a list of different ones here. Some of these names show up at a later time. Look at verse 2. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Midian for sure, because there's a group that comes up later named the Midianites, and they live east of the Jordan River area. They're kind of nomadic people, and they show up again in the book of Judges, and they're a big tribe of people at that time, so large that they're threatening to Israel. So this is apparently one of the descendants of Abraham. Hagar's son Ishmael is the father of the Arab people. So further down the Arabian Peninsula is where they end up settling. So yeah, we have a little bit more information about the expansion of this family and the different tribal groups in the region. Yeah. If there are no other questions, why don't we bow? Go ahead.
Probably two, because it says nations, so that was his way to separate them and have nations.
Yes. Yeah, so
each went their own way.
they each go their own way. Abraham sends them away. He gives gifts to the families that are coming from these descendants, and then he sends them away from Isaac, because Isaac is supposed to inherit the promised land, isn't he?
Yeah.
So he's going to have this particular region, and a lot of them seem to end up across the Jordan River, out in what we would call the wilderness areas. That's where they end up being. But Isaac gets that promised land there at the heart of what we call Israel. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Ishmael's family, they were still part of the God-fearing family at that point. Like Isaac, it wasn't until later when Muhammad came along.
Yes, Islam, the Arabs eventually become Muslim, but this is many, many centuries later. It's not till I think the 7th century AD that the Arab people become Muslims. And before that, Christianity was spreading among the Arab people. We know this from reading the Quran. It mentions Jesus, it mentions Mary, and it appears that a number of them are coming to faith and knowing the Lord Jesus Christ. But then when Islam comes along, Islam is sort of a conquering religion. And the Christians or churches that may have grown up in that area of the world kind of disappear as Islam spreads. And this is, it gets kind of complicated as to the relationship between Islam and Christianity. And they end up competing with one another, and it becomes kind of a big battlefield between Christians and Muslims, way far away from Arabia, all the way over in what we call Spain. Right? That becomes a battlefield between Christians and Muslims. And eventually the Christians went out and they stopped the advance of Islam into Europe at that time. So we're centuries later. Centuries later. It's an angel of the Lord who guides Hagar and Ishmael. So they seem to be sharers of Abraham and Sarah's faith, that they know the true God from that early time. When Islam comes, when Muhammad shows up, the Arab people are worshiping a variety of gods. They become polytheists. So that is a later development. And how all that happens, I don't think anybody knows. Okay? Yeah, there's a lot we don't know. The Bible tells us some things and not everything. It tells us what we need to know. Let's bow our heads in a closing prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the way it guides our lives, especially this day as couples, as husbands and wives. And we pray, dear Lord, that you would bless us in our marriage relationships. We also pray, dear Lord, that you would bless our children and our grandchildren, that they would meet and marry persons who are good for them, who are a blessing to them, who have those characteristics that will strengthen the bonds of the marriage and raise up children holy unto you. Through Jesus Christ our Savior, we ask these blessings. Amen. Thanks, folks, for the discussion.